Hello, everyone, and welcome to Encryption Decoded, what you need to know before you buy. I am Kristen Hinsberger, the Senior Program Events Manager at ESET North America. Please note this is a live presentation. It is being recorded and will be available following the conclusion of the webcast. For more information on this topic, including a link to ESET's corporate blog, please check out the Attachments tab. If you have questions for the presenter during the webcast, you can submit them through the Bright Talk question tab at the top, and we will address them during the Q&A sessions. Presenting today's webcast is ESET's Partner Sales Engineer, Ben Reed. With 10 years of experience in both small and large organizations, Ben has quickly grown through the IT ranks. He has held several positions in IT, including Help Desk, System Administrator, and Solutions Engineer. Ben has been at ESET for over 3 years and has immersed himself in the ESET Remote Administrator and ESET Endpoint clients, helping customers with configuration and deployment of ESET solutions. And with that, I'd like to welcome Ben to the webcast, and I'm going to pass it over to him. I think we're starting here with a polling question. Welcome, Ben.
Yes, thank you very much, Kristen. And yes, we are going to go ahead and start with a polling question, because this gives us a little bit of background on what our audience currently knows about encryption and if they currently actually are using encryption today. So yes, this is the first polling question, and the question is, do you currently have encryption? Either yes, no, or you are looking to purchase soon. If you go ahead and enter in your results, we can go ahead and see what everyone has currently in their organization. So far, it looks like the majority of people actually do not have encryption. Now it's actually getting to be where it's actually a split. So that's actually great information, because we're going to be going through during this presentation some pitfalls that people have run into with encryption. Is it too difficult for users to utilize, and so forth? And is that one of the barriers for you to enter into the encryption space as well? So with that, we'll go ahead and we'll hop into the actual presentation. So before you actually talk about encryption, you need to realize about all of the data breaches that are occurring. Who is vulnerable? Who is actually losing the data? And of course, if you follow the news, you've probably seen lots of these data breaches occurring. All of these things keep happening in the news, and they're almost happening on a weekly basis, to the point where almost every day or every week you open up the newspaper and there's another hotel, another retail establishment breached. And so most people, because they see all of that information in the news, they would think that all of the breaches are happening in the retail space. When in fact, if you actually go ahead and you look at the statistics, most of the breaches are actually occurring in the public sector. Then, after public sector, information services, financial services, then retail. So retail is extremely low on the list, despite all of the media attention that they get having to do with these breaches and losing of customer or consumer data. And lots of these departments are typically in spaces that are underfunded, especially in the instance of public sector or education. And so it gets even more scary that these people are not just targeting these retail companies. They're targeting every company, and data breaches are occurring in every single sector. The cost of that data breach, how much does it actually cost you if you were to have a data breach? And I actually like to point out in this slide education, because people always ask me the question, why is education so high? Why is it so expensive for education? And if you think about it, if a school was to be breached, maybe even elementary, middle school, high school, and they steal student and social security numbers, in most instances, those hackers will have access to those social security numbers until those students are old enough to either buy a house or take out a credit card. Because prior to that, these students aren't going to be monitoring and checking their credit. So education becomes extremely costly because you need to buy credit monitoring or other identity theft monitoring services for a much, much longer period of time. And as you can see, not only is it expensive, but the data breach cost has been going up year after year. And that's about a 12% increase in cost as opposed to 2013. So if you are getting breached, the cost to you is getting even more costly. And so what are these data breaches? Are they actually avoidable? And in fact, yes, they are. And if you go and you look at the Ponemon Institute, they do a data breach study almost every year. And what they found is that 53% of all data breaches were completely avoidable. 47% are the malicious ones, and those were the unavoidable ones. But people start to wonder, okay, 25% was human error. What is human error? Human error is things like using very basic passwords, not actually choosing difficult passwords, writing passwords on sticky notes, or saving their passwords built into their computer. And then 28% about the business process failures, what those are items when companies have purchased encryption, or they've purchased a solution to grant them more security, yet they never deployed it. Or they did deploy it, but it was too complicated for users, so then they took it off and removed it. So that's what actually happens with these business process failures. And so yes, 53% of all of these data breaches are completely avoidable. So what actually drives people to want to purchase encryption? Because we can go ahead and we can look at the value of encryption and what companies of different size think when it comes to encryption. How important do they think it is within the entire scope of security? And as you can see, as the companies get larger and larger, encryption is more of a big deal for those companies. Yet it is still important part of a security multi-layered approach in all companies. Most people want to think that people purchase encryption because they're doing it out of goodwill. They're protecting customer data. They're protecting financial data. Or they're protecting valuable IP. Most people want to think that's why people are doing it. And in fact, in our experience, we get lots of interest about this. But we get very, very few orders when it comes to these sorts of things. Why people actually purchase encryption is because of regulatory or legal compliance. And so they don't want to have to pay a fine to the compliance bodies like HIPAA or PCI. They want to make sure that they're meeting those regulations, so once again, they don't get fined. And then the biggest one as well is avoiding bad press. Like I showed you in the beginning, all of those companies that have been recently breached, and they're constantly in the news getting bad publicity. So this is what we actually get most of our orders associated with. People are wanting to meet a compliance or avoid that bad publicity. So what are the data protection laws in the United States? So next polling question is, are you currently in a sector regulated by HIPAA or PCI? Yes, no, or I don't know. Because these are the two biggest compliances in the United States when it comes to the need for encryption solutions. Now I'll just give some time for everyone to vote. Yes, so it looks like right now it's about split between yes and no. So it seems like we have a lot of people that actually will require encryption in their organization due to those compliances like HIPAA and PCI. But it's not just HIPAA and PCI in the United States that you have to worry about. There's quite a lot of other laws associated with encryption. The United States has 20 sector-specific data security laws. California on its own has 25 privacy and data security laws. And then, of course, if you do have to meet HIPAA requirements, they have even more extensive data and security requirements. Also, there are times when you have to notify the government, or you have to notify the state's residents when a security breach occurs. And the three big ones are, of course, when there is a loss of healthcare information, the loss of financial information, or the loss of government agency information. And the biggest one that's been in the news recently associated with government agency is, of course, the OPM breach, which lost several million people's records. Everything about them, social security numbers of them and their family members, and so forth. And then finally, what's the impact from these regulatory bodies if you don't have encryption in place? So not only do you get penalties from the FTC and state attorneys general, you also can face civil penalties. Or actually, the more important one is you are constantly sued for damages because you've now lost people's identity. You've lost their credit card numbers and caused them inconveniences. So then you get a series of lawsuits after the breach occurs due to these facts. And so because we saw all of these breaches that are occurring, people start to wonder, okay, why does encryption policy actually fail? We know that lots of these companies are supposed to have encryption in place, or they do have encryption in place, but they're still getting breached. They're still getting their records stolen and so forth. And lots of people think that the reason why encryption fails is due to key strength. So lots of people say also 128-bit encryption. That's not enough. It's not strong enough. But if you break down 128-bit encryption, that means there's 2 to the 128 possibilities or amount of AES keys in it. And that's that very, very large number. And if you go ahead and if everyone in the world had the capabilities to check 1 billion keys per second, it would take 1.6 trillion years to crack 128-bit AES encryption. Lots of people don't realize that because they're told they need better and stronger and the best of the best, when in fact 128-bit encryption will take that long to actually crack. If you look at 256-bit encryption, it gets even crazier. The Earth contains roughly this many atoms, and if every single atom were a computer and could check 10 billion keys per second, we would be halfway there in 2.8 billion years. And the halfway point is, of course, important, because the halfway point is typically where we will find it, because of the fact, just because of statistics. When you're halfway there, you most likely will have found the encryption key by that time. So what I'm basically saying is that all validated commercial encryption products and encryption methods are extremely strong. And in fact, those encryption methods are probably too strong. And so because encryption keys aren't the issue, or encryption methods, or key strength, what is the issue? And what we find is that encryption policy fails because of the human factor. Encryption is too complicated. And then because encryption is too complicated, it leads to admins having trouble, users having trouble, and so forth. And one of the biggest data breaches that's been in the news over the past several years, multiple movies have been made about it, is Glenn Greenwald and Edward Snowden. Edward Snowden, of course, famously or infamously for leaking information from the NSA. Glenn Greenwald was the reporter, technology reporter, that Edward Snowden actually leaked the information to. And Edward Snowden basically talked about how big of a nightmare it was trying to help Glenn Greenwald, a technology journalist, understand encryption and explain to him how to use it, because it was something completely new to him. And so Edward Snowden went on to say that encryption tools need to pass the Glenn Greenwald test. And what he meant is that it does not matter how clever, how strong, how great the encryption software is. Because if it is too complicated or intimidating for the average user, then it is not going to be utilized properly. And this is especially true because just like Snowden says, that people out there think that encryption is some sort of black magic. And the reason is they have no understanding of what encryption is or how it even works. So when it comes time to actually choose an encryption product, you have to make sure you actually choose the right product. And in order to do that, you need to know what matters to your company. And what we find what matters is that, is the product validated? Has it been validated and verified by a third party? Someone like FIPS and so forth. Can the encryption policy be enforced easily? And the most important is it simple and intuitive for the end user? And the reason why we stress that one is because you have to consider the human factor honestly. Because if it is difficult, if it is hard to implement or utilize, productivity will suffer. Then management will press for a change. So then IT has no choice to remove or relax the encryption policy. So that is why it's very, very important that when going and implementing encryption into any organization, you need to recommend that they have a multi-user trial. And don't just limit that trial to IT and administrators and IT department. Because you need to make sure that the encryption product can be utilized by your least technical person and your most technical person as well, so that you do not have to go ahead and relax or remove the encryption policy. And we actually have some validation for this mindset and this thought, in that we went out and Poneman Institute polled different IT practitioners and business managers to find out what they thought about encryption. And the IT practitioners aren't the important ones, because they will be able to figure it out and get it installed and get it running. The important people here are the business managers. They're the ones that are constantly traveling around and utilizing the software. And if only 32% of them agree that encryption is easy to use, then there is probably something wrong in the encryption industry that needs to be solved. So now that we've covered that much, what type of encryption is your industry interested in? Most commonly, most companies are interested in the full disk encryption side of things, because that's what most regulatory bodies require. But other companies want file level, email, USB, to try and start preventing things like data leakage and so forth. So if you can go ahead, enter in your vote now, we can go ahead and check out what those results are. All right, so it looks like the same thing stands with this polling as well. Looks like most people are interested in full disk encryption, then file, then email. And that's kind of surprising, because lots of times what we find is companies are interested in USB encryption as well, because they don't want users removing company documents outside of the organization and bringing them home. So let's go ahead. So DesLock. DesLock is our encryption product. So why would people choose DesLock? And how do we keep it as simple as possible? And how do we respect the human factor in the encryption process? So prospects will typically come around and compare feature sets and ask us, can you do X, Y, and Z? Because other companies can do it, so why don't you do it? Or they'll just have feature sets from company A and company B. And they'll say, oh, you don't have this many features, so we're going to go with the company that has more features. But feature sets should not be what matters. What prospects need to do is prospects need to figure out, what features do you actually need, and what features does an encryption company do very, very well. Because if you're only going to be utilizing full disk encryption, which it looks like the majority of people were interested in, you probably want to go out and find the company that does full disk encryption the best. And you don't really need to care about the other features that they have. Or if you're interested in USB encryption, you probably want to look at that and compare that. So what I'm saying is you don't want to go ahead and just judge companies based off their feature set. And over the years, what we found is that the left side is what most companies need to do for compliance reasons. And the two biggest sellers with DesLock are, of course, full disk encryption and removable media encryption. The right side is other nice-to-have or extra features that come with DesLock, or features that admins later on decide that they need to implement in their organization after the fact. to meet specific security policies. So what's actually different about DESLOCK? So we actually have a patented key sharing system. And first, if we take a look at the middle picture, when you leave password policies up to users, they usually choose the easiest option possible. And they choose passwords like 1234. Sometimes they take it even a step further and they write the password on a sticky note. And most encryption solutions, if you're encrypting a flash drive or email, they ask you to utilize a password to encrypt that item with. And once again, you're leaving it up to the user, which is very much insufficient when you're protecting sensitive data. So because of this being a headache, most data security tools work on a one unique key per user basis, which makes sense to start with. But the longer you work with this type of system, the more restrictive it becomes. And that's that graph on that right-hand side, or that picture on the right-hand side. And the problem with this is that when a new person were to join the company, you now need to make sure that they receive keys from every other person in the company in order to communicate. Then you have to go back to all previous communication and files, and you need to re-encrypt all of those files so the new person can read all of the previous correspondence. Even if this is an automated process, even if they try and make this easier, that's still happening on the back end to all of those files. And it still is chewing up resources, whether processor and memory resources, so that re-encryption of all of those files and emails can be done. And it just seemed like a tedious process and didn't lend itself well to trying to make it as easy as possible for users. So what DESLOCK does is that all the way to the left picture, we allow users to have multiple encryption keys. And those encryption keys are shared among the group. And for business users, these encryption keys are created on our central management server and distributed out to the users. And by the same token, those encryption keys can also be removed from the end user's computers. Those keys aren't rescinded or revoked. We just remove the user from having to access that encryption key anymore. But the actual encryption key still exists. And so that encryption key, just like the key on your keychain to get into your house, is not for a person, but for a thing, the subject, the project, or the department. So in the picture, we have three colors, and they could reference in your organization department red, department green, and department blue. Someone could be a member of just a single department, or in the case of IT employee located in the center, he would be a member of all of the departments, so he can always access everyone's data. So it makes it very simple, because just as if you had a maid coming to your house, you would just give them a key and they can get into your house. And it works the exact same with DESLOCK. If you hire a new employee, all we need to do is give him the encryption keys associated with the department that he's in, and now he is ready to go and set up. And in fact, DESLOCK will import in all of your Active Directory OUs. So if you already have users split up into their OUs, it's just as simple as going ahead and choosing what encryption keys each department will have. And now as a new user gets onboarded, they will automatically get assigned the proper encryption keys. User-proof removable media. Lots of companies, what they do when it comes to removable media is they just say, we don't want to deal with it, we're going to block it. We're going to block and lock down every single USB port. Then it becomes a major time sink for IT administrators when users do need to transmit data outside of the company. They go, they enter a help desk ticket. IT brings them a flash drive. They copy the data to it. Then they're able to bring it for a presentation or home or wherever they actually need it. So lots of companies, that's their focus, is let's just go ahead and block it because it is too difficult. Or they have the option to full disk encrypt a flash drive. Or they have file level encryption on that flash drive. And then users bring that flash drive home and they don't understand why it's not working, or why I can't use it, or I can only use it on these computers and not the other computers. So what DESLOCK does is what we call user-proof removable media encryption. Although you can encrypt the entire drive and you can do file-level encryption, most people choose the third option, which what it does is when you plug a flash drive into a work computer running DESLock, it will create an encrypted folder on the drive and mount it as the root of the drive. So it'll look like the drive is completely blank. You can then copy work data to that flash drive and bring it to any work computer in your organization. But if you bring that flash drive back home, all of your work data will be hidden, and you'll just be able to see the data that was previously on that drive. Maybe it was your music or movies and so forth. So this allows for very, very easy utilization. Home data will stay at home, and work data will stay at work. And users just understand that concept. And now there's nothing that you even have to think about or worry about, because removable media encryption will just take care of itself by automatically splitting up home data and work data for you. So in the past, we have used a system, just like everyone else, where you had to connect it with Active Directory to work. It needed to be installed on dedicated hardware. If you wanted to have off-domain control, which most companies want because they have so many laptops out there, you need to open a slew of ports for that ability to even function properly. And so customers' expectations really reflect a lack of vision from major competitors. They've just started to accept that these are the requirements for an encryption solution. They don't demand anything different. And so most customers actually need something better. They need a management server without compromises. So DESLock has completely optional Active Directory. You don't need Active Directory to use it. The DESLock management server can be installed on any PC or VM that runs Windows XP or better. You have full control on or off the domain without any changes to your firewall at all. You also have the ability to do fast remote policy and feature changes in seconds, no matter where that remote computer is. Even if they're at home or Starbucks, you can still completely manage the encryption remotely. But not only can you remotely change policies and features, it also has the ability to remotely blue screen and wipe a computer no matter where that computer is. And once again, without any changes to your firewall. So not only is DESLock sold into spaces where encryption is mandated or required, but it's also sold into any company who has remote users. Because you have the ability, in case of employee termination, to remote wipe and blue screen their computer. Then when DESLock lets you know the process has been completed successfully, you can then have HR call the employee and let them know they've been terminated. And you'd be surprised how big of an issue this actually is. All the time, people are worried about employee retaliation after they've been fired. They're going to go send an email out to the entire company saying bad things, or they're going to steal a client list or customer records and so forth. So this gives you peace of mind. And it's actually much better than lots of the other encryption solutions that require people to connect to VPNs or require people to be on the same network. Especially if you were to lose that laptop. Chances are the person who finds your laptop is not going to connect back to your VPN. Is not going to bring it back to your office. So you need a way to remotely wipe it and remotely blue screen it, even though people are not on the same VPN and are not on the same organization. Once again, the only requirement is that they have an internet connection. No firewall ports at all. So what operating systems do we support? So DESLock goes ahead and DESLock will support any Windows operating system, starting with Windows XP and all the way going to Windows 10. On the hardware side, we support BIOS and UEFI. And then on the disk side, we support MBR and GPT. On the mobile side, we only have an iOS app. And the reason why is there just hasn't been very much demand on the Android side. And in fact, the demand on the iOS side isn't as large either, even though there are some organizations who push for it. And the reason being is lots of companies don't want their employees reading important or sensitive data on their mobile device, like their phone. So they just don't allow it. But we have the ability to have email, attachment, and file encryption on any iOS device version 7 and up. The app, the DesLock app, is free on the App Store. It only supports password-based encryption with the free version. But you can actually pay for the license, for the mobile license, and that will give you the ability to take that and bring it into your management server, where you then can use the key files. You can use the encryption keys and the policy management and so forth. So how does licensing work within DesLock? So ESET goes ahead and we offer several different items. We offer training, demonstrations. We have resellers that can help you and so forth. We even have the ability to help you get a POC running in your environment. And then if you do get a trial of DesLock, those licenses, those trial licenses can be extended, enlarged, or at any point if you decide DesLock is the software for you, they can actually be converted into full licenses without you having to uninstall or remove or decrypt anything at all. So we have a few different versions of DesLock. The most commonly sold DesLock is DesLock Pro because of the fact it has that full disk encryption. And full disk encryption, like I mentioned, and it looks like our attendees agree, that full disk encryption is what they're interested in. And if you purchase DesLock Pro, it comes with every other feature built into DesLock. If email and removable media encryption is the only things you care about, yes, we have a version for you as well. And thank you very much for your time, and that will conclude the demonstration portion of the webinar. And before we actually hop into the Q&A, we have one more poll question, and we will open the voting for that now.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Ben. And as a reminder to the audience, if you do have any questions, I see we have a bunch in there, so that's great. Please enter them into the Bright Talk question tab at the top. And this polling question you can answer at any time throughout the rest of the webcast. In addition, for more information on this topic, including the DesLock encryption promo, please look at the attachments tab at the top. And now I see some more questions coming in, so I'm going to hand the presentation back over to you, Ben, for the Q&A portion.
All right, so let me go down to the bottom. So can we get a PDF or a PowerPoint of the slides? I'm pretty sure Bright Talk makes that available, but we can definitely see about making that available as well after the presentation. What's the most common question we get about encryption? The most common question we get about encryption is just, what is it? How does it work? And so forth. Is it actually going to protect anything? And so these are the questions that we usually get because encryption is something completely new to organizations. They have no idea what it does or where it's been, and it's kind of how two-factor authentication was 3 or 4 years ago. But now that's becoming more of a mainstream thing. And as more compliances come into the sector that require encryption, it's going to go ahead and become a more discussed about topic. What about mobile? How do you encrypt that? On the mobile side, we don't actually encrypt the device. We can't encrypt iPhones. We can't encrypt Android devices. And the reason why is because Android, in their newest version of their OS, and iOS, the newest version of their OS, encryption's turned on by default. So if we were to go ahead and encrypt it, we'd double encrypt it. It would be encrypted, then encrypted again. So that's why we don't do any tie-ins directly to full disk encryption on those mobile devices like Android and iOS devices. Are there certain verticals at a higher risk? Actually, no. Almost all verticals are at the same risk. They're just going to target companies that have the ability or they see an ability to easily get the data. So lots of times, sadly, this ends up being mom and pop shops. Except mom and pop shops lots of times have no idea that they're supposed to report data breaches to different bodies. So it's not just those mom and pop shops, but it's all industries. Education, because they're underfunded, it ends up being easier. Public sector, because they're underfunded, it ends up being easier as well. So with USB encryption, third option, how is free space on the flash drive handled? So what it does is when we create that encrypted folder, it will be a 0-byte folder. So you will still have all of the available space on that drive. If you then go copy files, encrypted files onto that device or work-related files onto that device, we will only be using the space that those files would typically use. If people bring the flash drive home and copy more music on it or more movies on it, same thing. We will just use the space needed for those files to live there. There's not any actual extra overhead or extra space utilized. So someone says they've been reluctant to do encryption on a laptop. Where's the key? Do you have to carry around a USB and plug it in to decrypt? No, not at all. So whenever you go and you full disk encrypt a laptop, the key is stored in a secure place on the hard drive. And so whenever you turn on your computer with full disk encryption, you are sent to a login screen. It's a pre-boot screen. It's prior to the BIOS even starting up. And you'll go ahead and you'll just enter in your username and password that you set. You can even have it tied directly to your Active Directory username and password if you want. Once you enter in that username and password, the drive will then be decrypted, and then Windows will be able to boot up just like normal. And we actually can enable single sign-on, so users will just be greeted with that deadlock pre-boot login screen. Then they won't have to log into Windows because we will automatically log them into Windows. So it looks almost the exact same. It's almost the exact same process for users. They still need to enter in a username and password. The difference is this password and user prompt comes prior to the BIOS and comes prior to Windows actually starting up. So what procedures do you recommend to vet your IT folks, the keepers of the keys to your kingdom? So the nice thing about Deslock is the fact that we never show you what the actual encryption key is. We will just identify it by a serial number. We're not going to tell you this is the 128-bit AES encryption key associated with it. So what you could do is if you are concerned about an IT person stealing it, what they would have to do is they would have to download the key outside of the management server. They would have to then go spin up a new management server, insert that key in, but also their license would have to be the same. If their license isn't the same, those encryption keys aren't going to function for them either. So it's a very, very interesting way to actually go about protecting users and protecting your company from IT stealing that data and taking it with them. So will the folder encryption work with share permissions via AD? Basically, what you would have to do is you would have to go ahead and you would have to encrypt those folders. So if you want an AD folder, a file share folder to be encrypted, you'd have to first encrypt it. And during that encryption process, you can define who you want to have access to it. It's not just going to take the security groups that you have and automatically say these people have access to it. And one of the big reasons why we don't do that is because if you already have security groups in place for those directories, those users that aren't in those security groups already won't have access to the files at all. So that's why we really don't do something like that. We can get the pricing of Deslock sent out to you as well. Does it support server encryption? Yes, it does support server encryption. However, most people don't encrypt their servers. Because full disk encryption, what it's doing is it's encrypting outside of the BIOS. And what you're really protecting is you're protecting if someone were to take that computer or remove the hard drives from that computer. That's what you're doing with full disk encryption and data at-rest protection. So if you have a concern that someone's going to walk into your office and walk out with a server, yes, you can go ahead and full disk encrypt it. But what most companies do instead is they put their servers behind a locked door, they put a sign-in sheet, and sometimes, depending on your vertical, you need to actually put a camera as well. If you do those three things, there is no need to have your servers encrypted at all. Yes, we do have a home version of DesLock, and in the future it may be going ahead and being bundled with AV or another product. Does DesLock have conflict with BitLocker? Yes, it does. And DesLock will conflict with any encryption product. And the reason why is, once again, we don't want to double encrypt things. We don't want to have BitLocker encrypted first, then DesLock encrypted second. And why people typically don't use BitLocker is because BitLocker over the years has had several breaches. They've had several vulnerabilities disclosed. And the bigger issue is that BitLocker has no way to report easily on when devices were encrypted, when they were decrypted, was the device encrypted the day you lost it, and so forth. So in fact, BitLocker is not HIPAA or PCI compliant due to the fact that it does not have those central reporting capabilities. It's great for just small businesses, but if you want to meet a compliance, you're probably not meeting that compliance. Then if someone were also to lose that laptop, or you're terminating that employee, with BitLocker there is no way to remotely wipe that computer if they're not connected back to your network or connected over a VPN. So it really isn't protecting you against much of anything. It even gets even worse if your users are the kinds of people who are saving those passwords on sticky notes. Because when someone finds the computer, they'll just enter in the password, they'll log in, and they'll have access to all of your data forever. And there's nothing you can do to actually kick them out of that computer at all. Will DesLock have any issues with the restore feature of any encryption hardware with Acronis backup? No, actually it won't. So as long as you've restored a similar hardware, you'll be perfectly fine in actually restoring that backup. If you're doing file level backups within the OS itself, it definitely won't have any effect at all when it comes to backups and recoveries and so forth. Can you use one facet of DesLock like full disk and then choose a third-party solution for email encryption? Definitely. We have lots of companies that will choose DesLock just for the ability to have that capabilities of remote wiping, to have the abilities of full disk encryption. Then they'll go ahead and they'll use something like one of those email portals that lots of healthcare companies are using nowadays. So definitely, you don't have to use all of the features within DesLock if you don't want to. But like I mentioned, the biggest features that people buy DesLock for are, of course, the full disk encryption and the removable media encryption. So how does our product protect against ransomware? So DesLock does not protect against ransomware. If files are encrypted already, they can be encrypted again. And ransomware actually will go ahead and do that. It will encrypt files that have already been encrypted, no problem. And it does that quite a lot. The real way that you protect against ransomware is, of course, with a good antivirus solution and having good backups. So making sure that your antivirus solution is one of the ones that is using heuristics, behavioral analysis. It has cloud capabilities to be able to be up to date on the newest threats as well. Can I compare DesLock versus PGP? Yes. PGP is a user key system. So what that means is every single user in the company has their own private and public key. Those keys need to be shared between every single user. And like I mentioned in the talk earlier, if someone new comes on board and he's in your department, you have to go ahead and you have to re-encrypt all of the data utilizing his key as well so that he can read the emails, the previous emails. He can open the previous files and so forth. DesLock, it's just as simple as dropping a user into the group and then they have access to the data. Because DesLock uses basically project, group keys, department level keys, rather than individual user keys. So now, if a new user hops in, you just give him access to whatever department's data he actually needs access to. Can email encryption be used with cloud-based email like Gmail? It's not as easy because of the fact that we can't tie directly into an email client. When you can tie it directly into an email client, it's very simple because you can just click a button that says encrypt and then or encrypt and send. With Gmail, we try to make it as easy as possible by creating a hotkey menu. So what it does is you can set hotkeys on the keyboard for the encrypt command or the decrypt command. And we can encrypt any text field. So it could be Notepad, it could be a Word document, it could be a cloud-based email provider like Gmail. And so all your users would do is they would type in an email, press that hotkey that would go ahead and encrypt their email, then they would simply click send, and now they have an encrypted email. If they receive an email from someone that was encrypted in Gmail, same thing, they would just hit the decrypt hotkey. And you can set those hotkeys to be anything that you want, or if hotkeys are too complicated for your users, we also have a GUI that can pop up and people will have it up on their screen all day. That they can just hit decrypt and encrypt. And it will encrypt any window or decrypt any window that those users have currently selected. So one other question was, why doesn't DesLock just tie directly into Key Vault? It's basically the same reason why we don't tie directly into BitLocker. There's lots of free tools out there in order to manage BitLocker, in order to manage Key Vault, and so forth. And honestly, we don't get that much demand when it comes to encrypting Macs, because lots of people who are using Macs already understand that they're already encrypted. Or lots of newer laptops, Windows computers. They know that they're already encrypted. So what we do is we go where the demand is, and we really haven't gotten that much demand to tie directly into Key Vault and manage the encryption from a central location. Of course, that's not to say some point in the future we won't tie directly into Key Vault. But as of today, we do not tie into Key Vault, and we don't manage BitLocker at all.
So Ben, it looks like I think we've answered all the questions in there, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for all your questions. That was great that we had a lot of participation. We hope that you found the webcast valuable. Again, you can rate this webcast or share it through your social media channels in your Bright Talk window. And for more information on ESET endpoint security products, you can either go to the attachments tab, that's where that DesLock encryption promo is, or you can go to eset.com. Thank you very much, and that concludes our webcast for the day.